I found my daughter 3 feet under the snow, still breathing. That was day 9. I know it was day 9 because I'd been scratching marks into the handle of the shovel every time the gray light cycled, not sunrise. There hadn't been a real sunrise since the impact, just a slow churning of the sky from black to the color of wet cement and back again. 9 marks, 9 cycles, and my daughter's face, blue around the lips, ice crusted in her eyebrows, her body wedged into the gap between the collapsed roof beam and the foundation wall of what used to be our house, in what used to be Flagstaff, Arizona, where it used to not snow in September. Her name is Lena. She's 8. She was wearing her school backpack when the house came down, the one with the cartoon fox on it, and the straps had snagged on a nail, pinning her in a pocket of air just large enough to keep her alive while 42 inches of flash-freeze snowfall and the weight of our roof pressed down on everything else. I pulled her out the way you pull a splinter from skin slowly, terrified of what tears if you go too fast. She opened her eyes and said, "Dad, my feet are gone." They weren't gone. They were there, inside her boots. But she couldn't feel them, and I couldn't feel mine. And the temperature, I'm guessing here because every thermometer I'd found had bottomed out, was somewhere around 60 below Fahrenheit, in Arizona, in September. I held her against my chest and ran the calculation I'd been running every hour since the sky split open. Calories remaining, water sources, shelter integrity, distance to anyone who might still be alive. The math was always the same. The math always said we were dead. We weren't dead yet. That's this story. That's the whole thing, if I'm being honest. We weren't dead yet, and we kept not being dead. And the creatures who sent the rock that broke our sky could not, for reasons I didn't understand until much later, figure out why. Let me go back. Not far. 11 days. I'm Tomas Palacio, 36 years old. I drove a water delivery truck for rural communities outside Flagstaff. Before that, I did HVAC installation. Before that, I did 2 years of community college and dropped out because Lena's mother left and someone had to be home. I'm not a scientist. I'm not military. I'm a guy who can fix a compressor and back a 10,000-gallon truck down a dirt road without scraping the junipers. And until 11 days ago, those were the most important skills I had. Now the most important skill I have is that I know how cold kills people. And I know how to stop it. HVAC. Heating, ventilation, air conditioning. I spent 4 years learning how buildings bleed heat and how to make them stop. I know R values. I know thermal bridging. I know that a human body generates roughly 100 watts at rest, and that in a properly insulated space, 4 human bodies can keep a room above freezing indefinitely. I know that still air is an insulator, and moving air is a killer. I know that moisture is the enemy, not cold. Moisture. Sweat inside your clothes, breath condensing on surfaces, any liquid at all touching skin when the ambient temperature is below -40. I didn't know any of this would matter. And then it mattered more than anything else in the world. The impact happened at 2:47 a.m. Mountain Time on September 8th. I know the exact time because my phone was charging on the nightstand, and the screen lit up with an emergency alert. The long, horrible one, the one with the skull-rattling tone, and then the power went out, and then the windows blew in. Not from the impact itself. We were too far from the strike point for the shockwave. What blew the windows in was the pressure wave from the thermal collapse. The atmosphere itself contracting as something pulled the heat out of it faster than physics should allow. I didn't know that at the time. At the time, I knew a sound like God ripping sheet metal, and glass in the air, and Lena screaming in her room down the hall, and then the cold. The cold came in like water, not gradually, not like opening a door in winter, like being submerged. 1 second the house was 68 degrees, the next second I could see my breath. And the second after that, the breath was freezing before it dissipated, tiny crystals hanging in the air like dust. I got to Lena's room. I got her into my bed with every blanket in the house. I sealed the broken windows with garbage bags and duct tape. There's always duct tape. If you've ever done any kind of trade work, the duct tape is a reflex. And I dragged the mattress away from the exterior wall and into the hallway, which had no windows. And I piled us in and sealed the hall doors with towels along the bottom gaps. And I held my daughter, and I listened to the house creak and pop as the wood contracted and the pipes burst, and the world outside went quiet in a way that I'd never heard before. Not silent, quiet. There's a difference. Silent is the absence of sound. Quiet is the presence of something so large and so heavy that it presses sound down, smothers it, absorbs it. The cold was like that. It had weight. By morning, by the first gray cycle, the snow was already 8 inches deep and it wasn't stopping. I need to describe what happened globally because it matters, but I didn't know most of it then. I learned it later, in pieces, from shortwave radio fragments and from the people we found and from the alien data we eventually accessed. So I'll tell it now the way I understand it now, and then we'll go back to the shovel and the snow and my daughter's blue lips. The object struck the North Atlantic, roughly 600 miles south of Iceland. It was not large, maybe 80 meters across, but it was not a normal asteroid. Normal asteroids carry kinetic energy. This one carried something else. The best analogy I've heard is that it was a thermodynamic weapon. On impact, it initiated a crystallization cascade in the ocean water that propagated outward at roughly 1,100 miles per hour, converting thermal energy in the water into I don't know the physics. Nobody does fully. Into something. Into whatever the Ven wanted it converted into. The effect was that 400 million cubic kilometers of ocean lost approximately 40 degrees of thermal energy in under 6 hours. The atmosphere, which gets most of its heat from the ocean, followed. Global average temperature dropped 91 degrees Fahrenheit in the first 72 hours. Everywhere, simultaneously. Not a gradient, not a wave, a collapse. As if someone had reached into the planet's thermostat and ripped the dial past zero. The Ven. That's what we call them, because that's the closest approximation of the sound their identification signal makes when you translate it through our equipment. 2 overlapping tones like the diagram. I didn't learn their name until much later. For the first 40 days, they were just the reason, the invisible, absent, untouchable reason behind the cold and the snow and the dying. Conservative estimates, and these came later, from people with the capacity to estimate, put the first week death toll at 3 billion. Not from the cold directly, from the consequences: infrastructure collapse, power grid failure, transportation shutdown, supply chain evaporation, hospital system failure, water system failure. Everything that keeps 8 billion people alive is, it turns out, calibrated for a temperature range, and when you blow past that range in hours, it all goes at once. 3 billion in a week. Another billion in the next 2 weeks. By day 40, the estimate was 5.5 billion dead, and the estimates themselves were unreliable because the people making them were also dying. But not everyone died. That's important. That's the point. In Flagstaff, Arizona, on day 9, I pulled my daughter out of the rubble of our collapsed house, and I put her on my back, and I started walking toward the only structure I knew that might still be holding heat. The Coconino County Water Treatment Plant, concrete walls 18 inches thick, underground cisterns, backup generator system designed to run for 30 days, and most importantly, I had installed the HVAC system myself 2 years earlier, and I knew every duct, every vent, every seam. I knew where it breathed, and I knew how to make it stop breathing. The walk was 1.5 miles. In normal conditions, that's 25 minutes. In thigh-deep snow at 60 below, carrying an 8-year-old on my back with wind that cut through 3 layers of clothing like they were tissue paper, it took almost 4 hours. I won't describe every step. There's no point. It was the same step, repeated 1,000 times. Lift the leg, push through the crust, find the ground, push forward 8 inches, pull the other leg out, repeat. Lena had her arms around my neck and her face buried in the collar of my coat, and she didn't speak. She'd stopped crying somewhere around the half-mile mark, and the silence scared me more than the crying had. What I will describe is what I saw, because it matters for what comes later. Cars, hundreds of them, stopped on the roads, already buried to their rooflines. Some had their headlights on, batteries still running, the beams cutting into the snow like the eyes of drowned animals. Some had frost on the inside of the windshields, which meant the people inside had been breathing when the car stopped, and then stopped breathing. I didn't look through the glass. I couldn't afford to stop, and I couldn't afford what I'd see. Buildings. Most residential structures had collapsed partially or fully. The snow load was already beyond anything they were engineered for, and the temperature differential between interior and exterior was creating ice dams and condensation failures and structural contractions that split load-bearing members. The commercial buildings were holding better, but their flat roofs were sagging dangerously. And the sky. God, the sky. I'd grown up in Arizona. I knew the sky as a big, bright, endless thing, blue so deep it hurt. Sunsets like someone spilled paint across a canvas the size of the world. Now it was a ceiling. Gray-white, textured like the underside of a frozen lake, pressing down so low I felt I could reach up and scrape it with my fingertips. No sun, no definition, no horizon, just a flat, dimensionless membrane of cloud and ice crystal that turned the world into a tunnel with no walls and no end. Lena whimpered once, near the 3-mile mark, and I said, "Almost there, Bean," which was what I always said when we were almost anywhere, and she tightened her arms and I kept walking. The treatment plant was still standing. The concrete walls were holding. The backup generator was running. I could hear it before I could see the building, a low diesel thrum cutting through the wind, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I broke through the service entrance, literally broke through it. The lock was frozen solid, and I kicked it until the frame split and we were inside, and the air was above freezing. And I set Lena down and she looked at me and said, "Dad, there's people here." There were, 11 of them, huddled in the main pump room around the generator's waste heat, wrapped in whatever they'd brought with them. A woman named Dahlia Okonkwo, who'd been the night shift supervisor at the plant and had simply never left. She'd kept the generator running and the doors sealed, and she'd done it alone for 2 days before anyone else found their way in. She was 43, originally from Lagos, an engineer with a spine like rebar and a voice that could make you believe the walls were thick enough. An old man named Garrett Lyle, 71, retired plumber, who had walked 3 miles in house slippers because his house was all electric and the power went out, and he knew from decades of working in buildings that the treatment plant had its own generator. A young couple, Marcus and Priya, who'd been driving through Flagstaff on their way to the Grand Canyon when the sky fell. They had a car full of camping gear that was now buried somewhere on the interstate, but they'd grabbed what they could carry. 7 others. I'll tell you about them as they matter. And then me and Lena, 13 total. Dahlia looked at me like she was looking at a math problem. "You're HVAC," she said. "How do you know that?" "You installed our system. I watched you do it. You argued with the county inspector about the duct gauge for 45 minutes. He was wrong. He was wrong, she agreed. The question is whether you can keep this building alive, because I can keep the generator running for maybe 20 more days on the fuel we have, and the water system is intact because the cisterns are underground and the water's still above freezing. But the air in here is already getting away from us. I can feel it. Every hour it's a little colder." She was right. The building was losing heat. Not through the walls. 18 inches of concrete has an R value that'll hold against almost anything. But through the roof penetrations, the ventilation system, the door seals, the 100 tiny architectural compromises that are fine when it's 30 degrees outside and fatal when it's 60 below. "I need duct tape," I said. "Spray foam. Insulation bats if you have them. Plastic sheeting. And I need everyone out of the pump room and into the smallest interior room you have, with the fewest exterior walls." "The chemical storage room," she said. "It's 12 by 15, no windows, 1 door, 3 interior walls. The 4th wall faces the cistern, which is underground water at 38 degrees. "That's our house," I said. "That room. Nothing else. We live in that room, we sleep in that room, we seal everything else off. The generator waste heat gets ducted into that room and nowhere else. We collapse our world down to 180 square feet and we keep it alive." Dahlia stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Garrett," she said, without looking away from me, "get the tools." Garrett was already standing. "Son, what's your name?" "Thomas." "Thomas, I've been a plumber for 46 years, and I've never been happier to meet an HVAC man in my life." Lena, sitting on the floor with a blanket Dahlia had given her, looked up at me and said, "Dad, can I have some water?" The water was clean. The water was above freezing. The water was still flowing. I handed her a cup and got to work. It took 2 days to make the chemical storage room livable. Livable, not comfortable. There's no comfort at 60 below. There's only the difference between dying and not dying, and the gap between them is narrower than you'd think. I sealed every penetration in that room, every electrical conduit, every pipe chase, every seam where the wall met the floor. every crack where the concrete had cured imperfectly 20 years ago. Spray foam, duct tape, plastic sheeting, and in one case a section of rubber gasket that Garrett cut from a decommissioned pump seal. I built a vestibule out of plastic sheeting at the door, an airlock, basically 2 layers of heavy plastic with a 3-foot gap between them, so that every time someone entered or left, they went through 2 barriers instead of 1. The temperature difference between the room and the corridor was already 30 degrees. Without the vestibule, every door opening would have cost us 5 minutes of heat. I ducted the generator exhaust through a heat exchanger, not a real heat exchanger, a coil of copper pipe I salvaged from the plant's mechanical room, run through a bucket of water to capture waste heat before the exhaust vented outside. It wasn't elegant. It looked like something a drunk plumber built while blindfolded. But it added 11 degrees to the room, and 11 degrees was the difference between 38 and 49. And 49 was survivable. Garrett helped with the plumbing. For a 71-year-old man in house slippers, he worked with a precision and steadiness that shamed me. His hands were enormous, swollen at the knuckles from decades of pipe wrenches and cold water, and they didn't shake. Not once. He talked while he worked, not to me, not to anyone specifically, just a low, continuous murmur about the pipe gauge and the solder joints and the water pressure and the things he'd built in his life. A monologue that I think was his way of staying in the world, of tethering himself to the tactile reality of work, so that the larger reality, the one outside the walls, the one where 5 billion people were freezing, couldn't pull him under. "You know what I think about," he said, threading a coupling onto a 3/4-inch line. "What? The code. Building code. All those years arguing with inspectors about minimum insulation requirements, pipe burial depth, structural load ratings, everyone complaining about overregulation, everyone saying it was government waste. And now the only buildings still standing are the ones that were built to code, the overbuilt ones, the ones where someone said, 'That's more than enough,' and some inspector said, 'Do it anyway.' The county inspector I argued with," I said, "wanted me to use 6-inch duct where I spec'd 8-inch. And you fought him. And I fought him. And you were right. I was right about the duct gauge, but the point is I cared enough to fight about it, and he cared enough to show up and check, and the manufacturer cared enough to stamp the rating on the label, and none of us thought any of this would matter in a way that meant life or death, but all of us acted as if it might." Garrett looked at me for a long time. "That's the thing about people, Thomas. We build for emergencies we don't believe in. We over-engineer for scenarios we think are impossible. And then the impossible happens and we're standing in it, and the only reason we're still standing is because somebody, somewhere, built it tighter than they had to." He went back to his coupling. I went back to my duct tape. Dahlia managed the generator. She'd been an engineer at a power plant in Nigeria before moving to the States, and she treated the diesel generator the way a surgeon treats a patient, with steady hands, precise attention, and the understanding that every decision about fuel consumption was a decision about how many days we had left. 20 days of fuel, she told me on day 12, 3 days after I'd arrived. Maybe 22 if I reduced the run cycle to 12 hours on, 12 off. We can't do 12 off. The room will drop below freezing in 4 hours without the heat exchange. Then we need more fuel. Where? She unfolded a map of the area, a real paper map, the kind nobody uses anymore, which she'd pulled from the plant's emergency kit. There's a fuel depot here, National Guard Armory 7 miles north. They'll have diesel, maybe JP8. Either will work. 7 miles. 7 miles. I looked at the map. 7 miles of open terrain in conditions that had nearly killed me at 1.5 miles. The snow was deeper now, the gray sky kept dumping it, a constant fine, dry powder that fell like sand and packed like concrete. The wind hadn't stopped since the first night. 7 miles might as well have been 700. "I'll go," said a voice from behind me. Marcus, 26, lean, with the kind of quiet physical competence that comes from people who use their bodies for work rather than for show. He'd told me he was a wildland firefighter out of Prescott. He and Priya had taken their first vacation in 2 years, and the world had ended on day 3. "You're not going alone," I said. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you I can make 7 miles. I've done 14-mile hikes in full gear at altitude. I've done fireline construction for 36 hours straight. 7 miles is a work day." Not in this. This isn't fire. This is the opposite of fire. And you've got a daughter to keep alive. If you die on that road, she's got nobody." He was right. The math was right. I hated it. "I'll go with him," Priya said. She was small, quiet, an emergency room nurse from Phoenix. "If he gets hurt, you'll need someone out there who can triage in the field. And if you both die, then you've lost 2 people instead of 13. She said it without flinching. "We leave at first light, or whatever passes for first light now." Dahlia looked at me. I looked at the map. 7 miles north, across a frozen highway and open rangeland and whatever else was out there, to a building that might be intact and might be empty and might have fuel and might not. "Take the 5-gallon cans from the generator room," Dahlia said. "All 4 of them. That's 20 gallons if you find fuel. That buys us another week." Marcus nodded. Priya started inventorying the medical supplies. Lena was asleep in the corner of the room, wrapped in 3 blankets with her backpack. The one with the fox tucked under her head as a pillow. She'd eaten a can of pinto beans for dinner and asked me if the snow was going to stop, and I'd said yes, eventually, which was either a lie or a prayer depending on how you looked at it. I sat down next to her and watched her breathe. In and out, in and out. The most important thing in the world, and it looked like nothing. Marcus and Priya left before the gray light came. I gave Marcus my heaviest coat, and Garrett gave him a pair of work gloves lined with thinsulate, and Dahlia gave him a compass heading and a hand-drawn map with landmarks that might still be visible above the snow line. "Due north along Route 89 for 4 miles, she said. "The highway should be identifiable by the telephone poles. They'll be the only vertical structures in the snow. Turn east at the Fort Toothill exit. The armory is the largest building in the complex. Concrete block, flat roof, fenced perimeter. And if the fence is buried, then look for the flagpole. It's 40 feet tall. It'll be above the snow." Marcus zipped the coat. Priya adjusted the straps on the backpack they were using to carry the empty fuel cans. They looked at each other the way people look at each other when they've made a joint decision that might kill them, not with fear, not with bravery, but with the specific resignation of people who have counted the cost and accepted it and are now simply moving forward. They left through the service entrance. The cold came in like a punch. I sealed the door behind them and stood there with my hand on the plastic sheeting and listened to their footsteps crunch into the snow and then go quiet. They were gone for 31 hours. Those 31 hours were the longest of my life up to that point, though there would be longer ones later. In those hours I worked. I checked every seal in the room. I redistributed blankets. I helped Garrett reinforce the heat exchanger, which was leaking at one of the solder joints. I talked to the other survivors and an accountant named Phil who hadn't spoken since he arrived. A teenage girl named Mika who'd walked 2 miles from her college dorm in sneakers and lost 3 toes and wouldn't stop apologizing for taking up space. A man named Ray who'd been a line cook at a Denny's and who, on day 11, cooked a meal from canned goods and water treatment plant supplies that he called Apocalypse Ratatouille, and that somehow, impossibly, tasted like something a person would choose to eat. And I talked to Lena. That was the most important work. "Dad, why is it so cold?" "Something hit the Earth, something from space, like an asteroid." "Like the dinosaurs?" "Similar." "Did it kill the dinosaurs again?" "There aren't dinosaurs anymore, Bean." "Birds are dinosaurs. Ms. Rodriguez said so." "Then yes, some of the birds probably." She thought about this. "Are we going to be okay?" I looked at her. She was sitting cross-legged on a folded blanket, her feet, which had regained feeling, which was something, which was a victory, tucked under her, the fox backpack beside her. She looked exactly like she looked on a Saturday morning at home, sitting on the kitchen floor while I made breakfast, asking questions about everything and listening to the answers with an intensity that made me feel like the most important person in the world. "I'm going to make sure we are," I said. Which was not yes, and she was smart enough to know it, but she nodded and accepted it the way she accepted most of what I told her provisionally, with trust she'd chosen rather than trust she was born with. Marcus and Priya came back on day 13. They came back with 80 gallons of diesel fuel, a hand crank radio, 14 MREs, a medical kit, and 23 additional people. The armory had been occupied, not by soldiers the National Guard unit had deployed somewhere or tried to before the roads became impassable, but by civilians. They'd broken in looking for shelter, found the fuel and supplies, but didn't have anyone who knew how to make the building hold heat. They were burning the fuel in open barrels for warmth, losing 90% of the thermal energy to the ceiling, and they were dying. Marcus had found them. Priya had triaged them. And then Marcus, in what I later learned was a 4-hour argument conducted in a freezing concrete building with people too hypothermic to think clearly, had convinced them to abandon a shelter they'd fought to reach and walk 7 miles south to a water treatment plant they'd never seen. On the word of a stranger who said there was a guy there who knew how to keep buildings warm. 23 people walked 7 miles in 60 below weather because a wildland firefighter told them an HVAC technician could save them. They arrived in waves. Marcus had broken them into groups of 5 and 6, staggered by 20 minutes, so that if one group went down, the others wouldn't pile up behind them. Priya walked sweeper, bringing up the rear, checking each group as they came in. 2 people had to be carried the last quarter mile. One man, I never learned his name, sat down in the snow 100 yards from the building and refused to stand up, and Marcus picked him up and carried him, and the man punched Marcus in the face, and Marcus carried him anyway. They all made it. Every one. 23 people, 7 miles, 60 below, and Marcus and Priya didn't lose a single one. The chemical storage room was no longer big enough. We expanded. I took the adjacent room, a mechanical space with one exterior wall, and spent 12 hours sealing it. Garrett worked beside me without being asked. 2 of the new arrivals, a woman named Sandra, who'd been a construction foreman in Sedona, and a teenager named Diego, who said he'd worked for his uncle's roofing company every summer since he was 12, joined us without being asked. We sealed it. We ducted the heat. We created a second airlock. 36 people in 2 rooms. Body heat alone was now generating 3,600 watts, enough to hold the interior temperature at 52 degrees, even during the 12-off generator cycles that Dahlia had reluctantly implemented to conserve fuel. 52 degrees. It sounds miserable. It was salvation. We need a name for this place, Garrett said on day 15, sitting against the wall with his massive hands wrapped around a cup of warm water. It's a water treatment plant, Dahlia said. It was a water treatment plant. Now it's where people live. Places where people live should have names. Lena, who was drawing on the back of a maintenance log with a pencil Mika had given her, looked up. It's the Warm. Nobody argued. The Warm it was. The hand crank radio Marcus had brought from the armory changed everything. Not immediately. For the first 3 days it picked up nothing but static and the occasional fragment of an automated emergency broadcast, the kind that loops until the power runs out, a robot voice endlessly repeating instructions that no longer apply. Shelter in place. Conserve food and water. Emergency services will reach you. Do not attempt to travel. Don't attempt to travel. We'd already had 23 people travel 7 miles in the apocalypse. The robot didn't know. On day 18, Dahlia found a signal. She was systematic about it. She'd set up a schedule, scanning frequencies for 20 minutes every 4 hours, noting what she heard and what she didn't, mapping the silence. Most of the electromagnetic spectrum was dead. The AM bands were a graveyard. FM was static. But there was a cluster of frequencies in the shortwave range, the old ham radio bands, the frequencies that hobbyists and preppers and lonely people in remote places had been using for decades. And on one of them, faint and thready and fragile as a spider's web, was a human voice. Calling from Cheyenne Mountain. If you can hear this, you are not alone. There are survivors. We are coordinating. This message repeats every 6 hours. If you have the ability to transmit, respond on this frequency. If you cannot transmit, know that we are here. You are not alone. The room went quiet. Not the bad quiet, the weight of the cold quiet. A different quiet. The quiet of people hearing something they'd stopped believing they'd hear. Mika started crying. Phil, the accountant who hadn't spoken in 9 days, said, Cheyenne Mountain, that's NORAD. It's military, Dahlia confirmed. The most hardened facility in the continental United States. If anyone was going to survive, it would be them. Can we talk back? Marcus asked. Not with this radio, it's receive only. Dahlia looked at me. But the plant has a maintenance radio. It's low power, designed for local communication with county utilities. I don't know if it can reach Colorado. What frequency? VHF, wrong band entirely. But if there are relay stations still operating between here and there, ham operators, military repeaters, anyone with a functioning transmitter, we might be able to daisy chain a signal. That's a lot of ifs. This whole situation is a lot of ifs, Thomas. We are alive on a planet that is trying to freeze. Everything is an if. She was right. She was always right. It was one of the things about Dahlia that I came to rely on, not her optimism, because she wasn't optimistic. Her clarity. She saw things as they were, and she named them, and she kept working. We didn't reach Cheyenne Mountain that day, or the next. But we kept listening. And what we heard over the following week assembled itself into a picture of what was happening on the surface of the Earth. And the picture was worse than I'd imagined, and better than I'd feared, both at the same time. The cold was everywhere. It was not regional. It was not hemispheric. It was planetary. Average global temperature had stabilized, if you can call it that, at approximately -50 degrees Fahrenheit. The poles were colder. The equator was warmer relatively, hovering around -30. The oceans were freezing from the surface down, with ice extending hundreds of miles from every coastline. But people were alive. Pockets, clusters, scattered across every continent like embers in a dead fire, small and fragile and burning on whatever fuel they could find. Submarines, underground facilities, geothermally heated buildings in Iceland and New Zealand and Yellowstone, nuclear power plants where the operators had stayed at their posts and kept the reactors running and used the waste heat to keep themselves and everyone who could reach them alive. Military bases, research stations, hospitals with backup generators and someone smart enough to seal the building, and places like the Warm, places where someone with the right knowledge, not specialized knowledge, not genius, but the practical, specific, hard-won knowledge of how things work, had looked at a building and seen not a building but a system, a thermal system, and had made it hold. The Cheyenne Mountain broadcast gave numbers. As of day 20, they estimated between 200 and 300 million survivors worldwide, out of 8 billion, a survival rate of under 4%. I did not share that number with Lena. There was a second broadcast. It came on day 22, on a frequency nobody was scanning because it wasn't a frequency anyone used. Dahlia found it by accident while calibrating the maintenance radio's antenna. It wasn't in English. It wasn't in any human language. It was a pattern, a repeating sequence of tones, mathematically structured, that Dahlia recognized immediately as artificial because the intervals were too precise and too regular for natural phenomenon. "It's not ours," she said. The room went very still. "What do you mean it's not ours?" Marcus asked. "I mean the carrier frequency is wrong. The modulation scheme is wrong. The signal strength is wrong. It's coming from above us, not from the surface. And the mathematical structure is base 12, not base 10. Could it be a satellite? Our satellites use base 10 computing, all of them. This is base 12. This is not human." She said it flatly, the way she said everything, as if the fact that an alien signal was broadcasting over our frozen planet was another variable to be accounted for, another parameter in the system she was managing. Nobody panicked. I want that on the record. Nobody screamed, nobody fell apart, nobody said it was impossible. Maybe because we'd already experienced the impossible, a planet flash frozen in hours, and the idea that it was done deliberately by something with intent was not more frightening than the idea that it was random. In some ways it was less frightening. Random means no reason, no logic, no appeal. Deliberate means there's a mind behind it, and minds can be understood. And what can be understood can be addressed, or killed. That thought came from somewhere dark and immediate, and I didn't push it away. "What's it saying?" Garrett asked. "I can identify the structure but not the content. It's repeating. A loop. If I had to guess, and I'm guessing it's a monitoring signal, a ping. Something checking on the status of something else. Checking on the status of the planet they just killed. That would be my assessment. So they're watching." Dahlia looked at me. "They're watching." This changed things. Not operationally, we still had to eat. We still had to stay warm. We still had to manage 36 people in 2 rooms with a dwindling fuel supply. But it changed the psychological architecture of what we were doing. Before the signal, we were survivors of a natural disaster. After the signal, we were survivors of an attack. And survivors of an attack are different from survivors of a disaster, because survivors of a disaster are trying to get back to normal. And survivors of an attack are trying to figure out whether the attacker is coming back. Marcus became colder, not in temperature, in demeanor. He'd always been quiet, steady, the guy who does the thing rather than talks about the thing. But after the signal, he developed an edge. He started asking tactical questions. Where are the approaches to this building? How many entrances? What do we have that could be used as a weapon? Against what? I asked him. Against whatever sent that rock. Marcus, they froze the entire planet from orbit. If they come down here, a fire axe isn't going to matter. Maybe not. But I'm not going to be sitting on the floor when they walk through the door. I understood him. I didn't agree with him, not then, but I understood the impulse. When you can't control the big threat, you prepare for the small one. When you can't fight the thing that's killing you, you sharpen whatever you have and you wait. It's not rational. It's not strategic. It's human. Priya, on the other hand, became more focused on the medical work. She'd taken over a corner of the second room as a clinic, using supplies from the armory medical kit and whatever she could improvise. Frostbite was the constant: toes, fingers, ears, noses. Of the 59 people we would eventually house in the warm, more arrived over the following week, drawn by the generator sound or the light from our ventilation exhaust or sheer dumb luck. 11 had frostbite severe enough to require amputation. Priya performed 3 of them herself, with a hacksaw that Garrett had sterilized with boiling water and no anesthesia beyond a rag to bite on. She did it with steady hands. She talked to each patient the whole time, a low, continuous stream of words: what she was doing, why she was doing it, what it would feel like, what to expect next, and her voice never wavered. And afterwards she went to the vestibule and sat between the 2 layers of plastic sheeting and cried until she ran out of tears, and then came back in and checked on the next patient. I don't have a word for what Priya was. Brave, isn't it? Brave implies a choice, implies overcoming fear. Priya wasn't overcoming anything. She was just doing what needed to be done, because she could do it and no one else could, and the need was in front of her. If there's a word for that, for the thing beyond bravery, the thing that's just the raw refusal to let someone die when you have hands and knowledge, I don't know it. But that's what she was. On day 29, Dahlia made contact. Not with Cheyenne Mountain directly, the VHF radio didn't have the range. But she reached a ham operator in Durango, Colorado, a man named Elias Montoya, who'd been running a relay station from his basement for 3 weeks, forwarding messages between survivor groups across the Southwest. Elias connected us to a network. 14 confirmed survivor groups in a rough arc from Albuquerque to Salt Lake City, ranging in size from 8 people in a church basement in Gallup to over 2,000 in the Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, where the military had established a functioning enclave with nuclear power and agricultural capacity. 14 groups, maybe 8,000 people total, in a region that had held 5 million before the impact. Through Elias, we reached Cheyenne Mountain, and Cheyenne Mountain told us what they knew. The object that struck the North Atlantic was not natural. Spectral analysis of the impact residue, conducted by a team of scientists who'd been inside the mountain when the world ended, and who now had nothing to do but analyze data, confirmed it was manufactured. The crystallization compound embedded in the impactor was a substance that didn't exist in the known periodic table. It operated on thermodynamic principles that violated conservation of energy as we understood it. It didn't destroy heat, it converted it, channeled it, redirected it somewhere. The alien signal Dahlia had found was confirmed by Cheyenne Mountain's more sophisticated equipment. It was originating from approximately 40,000 kilometers above the planet geosynchronous orbit. There were, in fact, 17 distinct signal sources, evenly spaced around the equator. 17 satellites, a monitoring network. They were watching us. Specifically, they were scanning for electromagnetic emissions, thermal signatures, and this was the detail that lodged in my chest like a splinter biological activity. The satellites were looking for life. Not in the abstract, searching the cosmos sense, in the specific, checking whether the pesticide worked sense. They're checking if we're dead, Dahlia said when we received this information. Are they going to send another one? Marcus asked. Unknown, but the monitoring network suggests they expect the first one to be sufficient. If they were planning follow-up strikes, they wouldn't need to check. So we're an extermination that's being quality controlled. That's one way to describe it. Marcus's jaw tightened. I watched his hands. They were clenched so hard the knuckles were white. Then we need to stop broadcasting, he said. Every radio signal we send, every light we show, every heat signature we generate, that's us telling them we're still alive. We need to go dark. If we go dark, we lose contact with every other survivor group, Dahlia said. We lose the relay network. We lose coordination. We lose the ability to share information and resources. We become 36 people alone in a box. 36 people alive in a box. Alive for how long? The fuel will run out, without coordination, without shared resources, without the ability to plan. We die in this box, Marcus, just slower. They stared at each other. The room held its breath. There's a third option, I said. They looked at me. We keep transmitting, but we give them something to look at that isn't us. Here's what I knew about thermal systems. Heat goes where you tell it to, if you build the channels right. Here's what I knew about the alien satellites. They were scanning for thermal signatures and electromagnetic emissions. They were looking for concentrations of both that indicated surviving populations. Here's what I proposed. We build a decoy, a structure separate from the worm that generates heat and radio noise. A false target, something that looks like a survivor settlement but isn't. If the satellites are checking whether the pesticide worked, we give them something to find, something far enough from us that if they decide to finish the job, they hit the decoy instead. It was ugly. I knew it was ugly. I was proposing that we deliberately create a target, knowing that if the aliens acted on it, they'd send whatever they sent to that location. It was a lie made of metal and fuel and radio waves, and its purpose was to make us invisible by making something else visible. That's a military deception operation, Marcus said. And for the first time since the signal, he smiled. I'm in. We built it over 2 weeks. Sandra, the construction foreman, led the physical build. She took 5 volunteers and constructed a basic shelter structure 4 miles south of the worm, using materials salvaged from collapsed buildings. They worked in 2-hour shifts because that was the maximum safe exposure time, and they lost no one, though Diego came back from one shift with his left ear frozen solid, and Priya had to remove the top third of it. He didn't complain. He was 17. He wrapped a rag around his head and went back out the next day. The decoy wasn't meant to be livable. It was meant to look livable from 40,000 kilometers up. Sandra built it with a metal roof, high thermal contrast against the snow. We ran a propane heater inside. We'd found a cache of propane tanks at a hardware store a mile west and vented it through a chimney that would read as a heat signature on any infrared scanner. And we set up a radio transmitter powered by a small generator, broadcasting a looped distress signal on multiple frequencies. The signal said, "Survivors here, need assistance, 300 people, coordinates follow, 300, not 36, 300. If they were going to target the signal, I wanted them to think they were hitting a major cluster. I wanted them to spend whatever they'd spend on 300, not on 36, Dahlia objected. She sat across from me in the warm, the map between us, and she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. Disappointment. You're setting a trap, she said. I'm setting a decoy. A decoy is a trap for attention. You're painting a target on an empty field and hoping they shoot at it instead of at us. But what if they don't shoot? What if they come down to investigate? What if the signal draws them to the surface and they find the decoy empty and start looking around? Then we're no worse off than we were. We're worse off because we've confirmed for them that we're intelligent enough to use deception. Right now, if they're scanning for life signs, we might read as residual biological activity, animals, microbial heat, noise in the data, but if they find a deliberate decoy, a constructed false signal, they know we're not just surviving. They know we're thinking. They know we're fighting back. She was right. She was always right. I hated it because she was right. So what do? I asked. Nothing? Just sit here and hope they don't look too hard? I don't know. But I know that the decision to declare war on an enemy you can't see, can't reach, and can't understand is not a decision to make in fear. I'm not afraid. Yes, you are. You're afraid for Lena, and you should be. But fear makes people build weapons when they should be building bridges. Bridges to what? To the thing that killed 5 billion people? Dahlia was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I grew up in Lagos. Do you know what the British did to Lagos? They burned it, twice, killed thousands, took everything, and my grandmother's grandmother rebuilt, not because she forgave them, not because she forgot, because rebuilding was the form her anger took. She didn't throw stones at the ships, she laid bricks, and she laid them so well, and so stubbornly and so permanently, that everything the British built eventually fell down, and everything she built is still standing. This isn't colonialism, Dahlia. This is extermination. There is no form of oppression that has not been described by its perpetrators as extermination, and there is no extermination that has ever been complete. Something always survives. The question is what the survivors build. I didn't have an answer for her. I built the decoy anyway. She helped me. She disagreed with it and she helped me build it, because that's what you do when you're in a group that's decided something. You argue, you lose, and you help. Because the alternative is fracture, and fracture at 60 below is death. The decoy went active on day 41. We shut down all non-essential emissions from the warm, killed the external ventilation, rerouted the generator exhaust through an underground pipe to disperse the heat signature, switched our radio communication to a narrow beam directional antenna that pointed at Elias's relay in Durango and nowhere else. And we waited. On day 53, something came down. Dahlia saw it first. She'd been monitoring the alien frequencies. She'd become obsessive about it, tracking the 17 satellite signals, mapping their timing, analyzing their patterns. She'd noticed that the signals pulsed in a cycle, 12 tones in sequence, a pause. Then the sequence repeated, every 18 hours, like a heartbeat. On day 53, the heartbeat changed. The pulse rate accelerated. The tones shortened. New frequencies appeared. And then, on the monitoring equipment she'd improvised from the plant's electrical diagnostic tools, she detected a new signal source, one that wasn't in geosynchronous orbit, one that was descending. Something's coming down, she said. She said it at 3 a.m. The room was dark. We ran lights only 4 hours a day to save fuel, and her face was illuminated by the faint glow of the diagnostic screen. And the expression on it was the expression of a person seeing the thing they've been preparing for and realizing that preparation and readiness are not the same. I woke Marcus. He woke Sandra and 2 of the others who'd been part of what he'd started calling the security team, a term I found simultaneously absurd and comforting. Where? Marcus asked. I can't triangulate with a single receiver, but the signal strength is increasing, which means it's getting closer. Based on rate of change, and this is very rough, it'll reach the surface within 4 to 6 hours. Do we know where it'll land? No. Do we know if it's heading for the decoy? No. Marcus looked at me. I knew what he was thinking. If it was heading for the decoy, the plan had worked. We'd drawn their attention away from us. If it wasn't heading for the decoy, if it was heading for the warm, we had 4 to 6 hours to do what? Run? Where? In 60 below with 59 people, some of them missing toes and fingers, one of them 8 years old with a Fox backpack. We watch, I said. We watch and we learn. And if it comes here? Then we learn faster. It didn't come to the warm. It didn't go to the decoy either. It went somewhere else entirely 60 miles north, into the open rangeland above the Kaibab Plateau. We tracked its descent by the signal it emitted. A steady, high-frequency tone that dropped in pitch as the object decelerated. It landed or settled or deployed. The verb didn't seem right for something that moved with that kind of control at approximately 9 a.m. local time, and then it started scanning. Dahlia picked it up immediately. A new kind of signal, not the orbital monitoring ping, not the descent tone, but a broad-spectrum sweep that she described as a sonar pulse made of radio waves. It emanated outward from the landing point in a sphere, passed over the warm, passed over the decoy, passed over everything in a 400-mile radius, and then repeated, every 90 seconds, sweeping. It's mapping us, she said, not targeting. Mapping. It's building a picture of what's on the ground. Can it see us? It can see the building, the concrete mass, the underground water. Whether it can see us inside, whether it can differentiate human bodies from structural material, I don't know. But the decoy. She trailed off, looking at her data. What about the decoy? The decoy reads like a decoy. The scan is sophisticated enough to distinguish between a building with 300 people in it and a shack with a propane heater. They'll know. My stomach dropped. Dahlia had been right. The decoy wasn't a defense. It was a declaration. We'd told them we were smart enough to lie, and now they'd know the lie for what it was, and they'd start looking for the truth. Turn it off, I said. The decoy. Turn everything off, now. Sandra went out with Diego. They made the 4-mile trip in record time, just over 3 hours, and shut down the heater in the transmitter and came back white-faced and silent. Too late, probably. The scan had already swept over it. If the alien probe was building a map, the decoy was on it, and so were we. We went dark, complete blackout, generator off, no lights, no radio, no heat exchange. The temperature in the warm began to drop immediately. 52 degrees, 50, 48, 45. Body heat alone wasn't enough without the generator supplementing. 42, 40, 38. At 38 degrees, water stops being comfortable and starts being dangerous. Not immediately, you won't die at 38 degrees if you're dry and clothed and out of the wind. But your body starts working harder, your metabolism increases, you burn more calories. And we were already on rationed calories, already thin, already running a deficit. 36, 34, 32. Lena pressed into my side. She was shivering. Everyone was shivering. Garrett had gathered the children. There were 4 now, including Lena and 2 toddlers whose mother, a woman named Janet, had carried them 12 miles from Williams into the center of the group, surrounded by adults. Body heat banking, the oldest technique. "Dad," Lena whispered, "why did the heat go off?" "We're hiding." "From what?" "From the thing that made the snow." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is it outside?" "It's far away, but it's looking for us." Another pause. "If it finds us, will it make more snow?" "I don't know, Bean. I don't want more snow." "Me neither." "Can you make it go away?" I held her tighter. "I'm working on it." The scan continued for 3 days. 3 days without heat, without light, without radio contact. 3 days at 32 degrees in a concrete room with 59 people, breathing fog, shivering, burning calories we couldn't replace. On day 2, Garrett's heart stuttered. He was 71, and he'd been working harder than anyone, and the cold stress put him into arrhythmia. Priya stabilized him with CPR and a technique she described as precordial thump, which, as far as I could tell, meant she punched him in the chest at precisely the right moment to reset his heart rhythm. "Don't do that again," she told him, pressing 2 fingers to his wrist to check his pulse. "Don't punch me again," he said. "If your heart stops, I'm punching you. Those are the terms." He laughed. It was weak, and it cost him, and it was the best sound in the room. On day 3, the scanning stopped. The alien signal from the ground went silent. Dahlia waited 6 hours, then 12, then 24. Nothing. Whatever had landed had either left or gone dormant. "Generator on?" I asked. Dahlia hesitated. I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the risk of detection against the certainty of hypothermia. She looked at Garrett wrapped in blankets with Priya monitoring his pulse. She looked at Janet's toddlers, their faces red from cold. She looked at Lena. "Generator on," she said. The heat came back. Slowly, the room didn't warm up in minutes. It took hours for the concrete to stop bleeding cold and start absorbing warmth. But it came. 40, 45, 50. And with it the sound of the generator, diesel throbbing through the walls, and the ridiculous, enormous, overwhelming feeling of being warm. People cried, not from sadness, from relief, from the physical sensation of warmth returning to extremities that had been numb, from the sudden release of a tension that had been held for 3 days without pause. Marcus cried, silently facing the wall, his shoulders shaking. I saw it and looked away, because it was private and because I was crying too and didn't want anyone to see. What the probe left behind was data. Not for us, for them. But in the process of mapping our planet, it had emitted enough information for Dahlia to begin mapping it back. She spent the next 2 weeks analyzing the scan patterns, the frequency profiles, the timing intervals. She wasn't a xenolinguist or a signals intelligence analyst. She was a power plant engineer, but she was methodical, and she was brilliant, and she approached the alien signals the way she approached everything, as a system to be understood. "They're not looking for survivors," she announced on day 71. She said it during what we'd started calling the evening meeting, a daily gathering in the warm, where Dahlia reported on external conditions, and I reported on building systems, and Marcus reported on security, and Ray served whatever he'd managed to cook. "They're scanning, but they're not looking for people. The scan resolution is too low. It can identify structures, heat sources, electromagnetic emissions, but it can't resolve individual biological signatures. Not from the ground-level data I'm seeing." "So what are they looking for?" "Civilization, infrastructure, technology. They're checking whether our industrial capacity survived. Power plants, communication networks, manufacturing, transportation. They're looking for the skeleton of a civilization, not for individual survivors." "Why?" "Because individual survivors don't matter to them. 50 people in a concrete box with a diesel generator are not a threat. A functioning civilization that could rebuild, that could reach orbit, that could eventually reach them, that's a threat." The room was quiet, not the scared quiet, the thinking quiet. "So they're not trying to kill everyone," Marcus said slowly. "They're trying to kill the civilization." "Yes, and from their perspective, they've succeeded. Global infrastructure is destroyed, power grids are down, communication networks are down, manufacturing is down, transportation is down, 96% of the population is dead. By any reasonable metric, a human civilization is over. But we're still here. We're still here, and so are the people in Cheyenne Mountain, and the people in Dugway, and the nuclear submarine crews, and the geothermal settlements, and every pocket of survivors across the planet. We're still here, but we're not a civilization. We're remnants, and remnants in their calculus are beneath notice." I thought about this. I thought about it while Lena drew pictures on the back of maintenance logs, and Garrett snored softly in the corner, and Ray heated water for what he called depression tea, which was hot water with pine needles in it and which tasted like drinking a forest floor, and which somehow made everything slightly more bearable. Beneath notice. They'd frozen our planet, killed 5.5 billion people, destroyed everything we'd built, and now they were checking to make sure the rubble was sufficiently ruined and we, the living, the breathing, the stubborn, the unkillable, were too small to see. I should have felt despair. I think I was supposed to feel despair. Instead, I felt something else. Something I didn't have a name for then and barely have a name for now. It was hot and it was tight and it sat in my chest like an ember and it would not go out. Beneath notice, fine. We'd stay beneath notice. We'd stay small and dark and quiet and cold. We'd stay invisible. And while they looked the other way, satisfied that their pesticide had worked, we'd do what Dahlia's grandmother's grandmother did. We'd lay bricks. The next 4 months were the hardest of my life. Harder than the first week, harder than the blackout, harder than pulling Lena out of the snow. Because the first week was adrenaline and the blackout was fear, and the rescue was love, and all of those have their own fuel. But the 4 months after that were something else. They were endurance. They were the daily, grinding, repetitive work of staying alive when staying alive requires constant effort and offers no reward except the opportunity to do it again tomorrow. We expanded the warm. Sandra and her construction team, which now included most of the able-bodied adults, because in the warm everyone worked, broke through into the adjacent wing of the treatment plant and sealed it. Then into the basement level, which was partially underground and naturally insulated. By day 90, we had 6 rooms, 2 corridors, a kitchen, Ray's domain, a clinic, Priya's domain, a workshop, Garrett's domain, though by now he supervised more than he worked, his heart still unreliable, and a communication center, Dahlia's domain. We grew food. Not outside. Nothing was growing outside. But in the basement, using grow lights powered by the generator and water from the treatment plant cisterns and soil that Sandra's team excavated from beneath the snow, we grew beans and lettuce and radishes in shallow trays. The yields were pathetic. A handful of beans, a few wilted leaves. But they were green, and they were alive. And after 3 months of canned goods and MREs, The first fresh lettuce leaf tasted like a promise. We taught. Mika, the college student who'd lost 3 toes walking from her dorm, organized a school for the children. She was studying to be an elementary teacher. She'd been 20 days into her first semester of student teaching when the sky fell, and she'd had no classroom and no curriculum and no students. And now she had all 3. She taught in the smallest room of the warm, using the backs of maintenance logs and pencil stubs and, when the pencils ran out, charcoal made from burned wood scraps. She taught reading and math and science and, because she was Mika and she couldn't help herself, she taught art. Lena's drawings went from crude stick figures to recognizable animals to, eventually, landscapes, not the frozen landscape outside, but the landscape she remembered. The red rocks, the juniper trees, the blue sky. She drew them over and over, and each time they were a little more detailed, a little more vivid, as if the act of drawing them was the act of keeping them alive. And I built. Every day I built. I reinforced insulation. I improved the heat exchange system. I designed and constructed a second heat recovery loop that captured warmth from the kitchen cooking operations. I built a ventilation system that circulated air without losing heat, using a counterflow design I'd learned about in a trade magazine and never thought I'd use. I built, and Garrett consulted, and Sandra framed, and Diego, who was 18 now, his birthday having passed unremarked in the chaos, carried materials and swung hammers and never complained, not once, about the ear he'd lost or the cold or the future or anything. Marcus organized scavenging runs. With a rotating team of volunteers, he mapped the accessible buildings within a 5-mile radius and systematically stripped them of useful materials: insulation, fuel, food, tools, clothing, medical supplies, batteries, wire, pipe, anything. The runs were dangerous. The cold had not relented. The snow was now over 10 feet deep across the valley floor, and the wind blew ceaselessly, and every trip outside was a negotiation with death. We lost people, I need to say that. Not many because we were careful, but enough. A man named Dale went out with a scavenging team on day 84 and didn't come back. They found him a quarter mile from the warm, sitting upright in the snow with his eyes open and his hands in his lap, as if he'd sat down to rest and the cold had taken him before he could stand again. Hypothermia does that. It tricks you. In the final stages you feel warm, you feel peaceful, you sit down, and you stop. A woman named Consuela died in the warm on day 91. Heart failure. She was 58 and had a condition that needed medication we didn't have, and Priya did everything she could and it wasn't enough. And Consuela died in her sleep, and Priya sat with the body for an hour before telling anyone. A teenager named James, one of the armory group, quiet, kept to himself, walked out of the warm on day 103 and didn't come back. He left a note. The note said, "I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore." We found his body 2 miles south near the decoy. He'd walked there deliberately. I think he wanted to be somewhere else when he died. 3 people. In the context of 5.5 billion, it's nothing. In the context of our 59, it was enormous. We buried them outside in the snow because the ground was frozen too deep to dig. Garrett built markers from scrap metal. We held brief services non-denominational because we had every faith and none, and what we shared wasn't belief, but loss. I spoke at Dale's service because nobody else wanted to, and because someone should. I don't remember what I said. I remember Lena holding my hand and looking at the metal cross in the snow and asking me if Dale was cold. "No, Bean," I said, "not anymore." On day 119, Dahlia cracked the signal. Not the content, the structure. She'd been working on it for months, filling notebook after notebook with frequency analysis and pattern matching, and what she called mathematical anthropology, which was her term for trying to understand how an alien mind organized information by studying the patterns it produced. "The monitoring signal is a census," she told me. It was late. Most of the warm was asleep. We were in the communication center, which was a closet-sized room with a desk and the radio equipment and Dahlia's notebook stacked floor to ceiling. A census? A count. The 17 satellites are counting. Every pulse, every 18-hour cycle, they count the number of active thermal electromagnetic signatures on the surface that exceed a certain threshold, and they transmit that count back to wherever. Their homeworld, their fleet, wherever they are. They're counting how many of us are left. They're counting how many clusters of survivors are left, not individual people clusters, population centers, groups large enough to register on their instruments. And what's the number? She looked at me. As of the last pulse, 712. 712 clusters, 712 pockets of survivors across the entire planet. Some tiny, like us. Some large, like Dugway. 712 embers in a dead fire. That's down from the first count I was able to decode, Dahlia said. On day 22, the number was 1,604. Half. In 100 days, half the survivor groups had gone dark. Run out of fuel, run out of food, run out of people. Frozen, starved, given up. How are they trending? Down, losing approximately 4 clusters per day. 4 per day. At that rate, every cluster on Earth would be gone within 6 months. The Van are patient, Dahlia said. They don't need to send another rock. They don't need to come down and finish us off. They just need to wait. The cold does the work. The math does the work. 4 per day, and in less than a year, the number reaches 0. They don't even have to watch. They just count. I stared at the notebooks, pages of alien mathematics, translated into human numbers by a Nigerian-American power plant engineer sitting in a closet in a frozen water treatment plant in Arizona. The absurdity of it was breathtaking. The horror of it was worse. Then we need to change the math, I said. How? I don't know yet, but the math says we die, so the math has to change. The idea came from Garrett, of all people. He was lying in his cot. Priya had restricted him to light duty after a second cardiac episode, and he'd obeyed her with the grumbling resignation of a man who knew she was right, and he was talking about pipes. He was always talking about pipes. You know what a closed-loop system is? He said. Yes, Garrett. A closed-loop system fails because it has no inputs. It only recirculates what's already inside. Eventually, entropy gets you. The fluid cools, the pressure drops, the pump wears out. Doesn't matter how well built it is. A closed loop is a death sentence on a long enough timeline. I know what a closed-loop system is. Then you know what we are. Every survivor group on this planet is a closed loop. We're burning fuel we can't replace, eating food we can't grow fast enough, wearing out bodies we can't heal. 4 per day, Dahlia said. 4 closed loops failing per day. So we need to open the loop. He pointed at me, his enormous hands, swollen knuckles and all. Open the loop. Connect the loops. What kills a closed loop? Isolation. What saves it? Flow. You connect enough closed loops together, you get an open system. Inputs, outputs, resilience, redundancy. What one group doesn't have, another group does. What one group can't do, another group can. You're talking about a network. I'm talking about a civilization. A civilization is just a bunch of closed loops that learn to share pipe. I brought the idea to the evening meeting. It was received the way most ideas were received in the warm, with exhaustion, skepticism, and the eventual acknowledgement that the alternative was worse. The plan was straightforward in concept and staggering in execution. We would establish physical connections between the 14 known survivor groups in the Southwest Network. Not radio connections, we had those. Physical connections, routes, supply lines, paths through the ice that could be traveled repeatedly, marked, maintained, and eventually improved. You're talking about building roads, Sandra said, in 60 below weather, through 10 feet of snow, to places 50, 100 miles away. Not roads, routes, marked paths with supply caches along the way, shelter points every 5 miles, insulated dugouts like the vestibule principle but for travel, places where a person can get out of the wind, warm up, rest, and continue. Who builds them? We do. In relay, we build the first segment from here to the next nearest group. That's the settlement at Camp Verde, about 30 miles south. They build the next segment from their end toward us. We meet in the middle. Then we both build outward in the opposite direction, toward the next groups. And we do this while also keeping everyone here alive. Yes. With what surplus labor? With the labor we free up by getting better at staying alive. Sandra stared at me. She was not a woman who sugarcoated, and she was not a woman who believed in optimism as a strategy, but she was a woman who built things, and the idea of building something that mattered, something that connected, something that pointed outward instead of inward, lit something in her face that I hadn't seen since the impact. "I'll need Diego," she said, "and 15 volunteers, and every bit of insulation material we can scavenge. You'll have them. And I need you to understand something, Tomas. People will die doing this. Not maybe. Definitely. You're asking people to work outside, in conditions that kill in hours, to build something that won't save anyone for months. People will die building the road before anyone walks on it. I know. Do you? Because Dale is dead, and James is dead, and Consuela is dead, and every one of them is a weight that this group carries, and you're asking us to add more weight. I'm asking us to carry weight that matters." She was quiet for a long time. Then, 20 volunteers, not 15, and we start tomorrow. Building the route to Camp Verde took 58 days. In that time, we lost 2 more people. A woman named Terry who collapsed during a construction shift and couldn't be revived, and a man named Olufemi who fell into a snow-covered ravine and broke both legs and died of hypothermia before the rescue team could extract him. Sandra marked their positions along the route with metal crosses, the same kind Garrett had built for the others. Way stations, she called them. They died on the road. The road remembers them. The route was 31 miles long, marked every quarter mile with orange-painted stakes driven into the snow, with shelter dugouts every 5 miles. The dugouts were Sandra's design, half-cylinders of corrugated metal buried under snow, insulated with scavenged fiberglass and sealed with spray foam, each one large enough for 4 people to lie down, stocked with a small propane cache, water, and emergency rations. Not comfortable, not warm, but enough to survive a rest stop. The Camp Verde group turned out to be 42 people sheltering in a gymnasium with a wood-burning stove and a creek that hadn't frozen because it was fed by a warm spring. They had food they'd raided a grocery distribution warehouse, but they were running out of medical supplies, and 3 of their people were seriously ill with infections that needed antibiotics. Priya loaded a pack with everything she could spare and walked the route herself. 15 hours, 31 miles, 60 below. She walked it in one shot, stopping at each dugout only long enough to warm her core temperature, back above hypothermia threshold. She arrived at Camp Verde, treated the 3 patients, trained their designated medic on wound care and antibiotic protocols, and walked back. When she returned, Marcus was waiting at the entrance. He looked at her, frost in her hair, ice on her eyelashes, hands shaking with cold and exhaustion, and said nothing. He took her pack. He handed her a cup of raised depression tea. She drank it and went to sleep. The next morning, she was back in the clinic. The Camp Verde connection was the first link in what we came to call the chain. Over the following months, we extended it, south to the Prescott Group, 28 people in a VFW hall, east to the Winslow Group, 17 people in a high school basement, north to the Page Group, 11 people in a power plant near Glen Canyon Dam. The dam itself was frozen solid, but the plant's turbine housing still held heat. Each connection was the same: weeks of construction, miles of marked trail, shelter dugouts, supply caches, and then the miraculous, improbable arrival of people from somewhere else, carrying things you needed, needing things you had, proof that the closed loops were opening. The Camp Verde group had food. The Prescott group had a doctor, an actual doctor, a retired surgeon named Ellen Huang, who could do things Priya couldn't. The Winslow group had a mechanic who could keep diesel engines running on improvised fuel mixes. The Page group had electricity. The dam's turbines were dead, but they'd rigged a small wind generator that produced enough power to run communication equipment. And we had knowledge. We had Dahlia's signal analysis, my thermal engineering, Sandra's construction expertise, Garrett's plumbing wisdom, Mika's school, Ray's kitchen. We had the warm, which was no longer just a shelter, but a model, a template for how to keep a building alive in conditions that should kill everything. I started writing it down. The thermal engineering protocols, the insulation techniques, the vestibule design, the heat exchange loops, the grow light agriculture, every trick, every hack, everything I'd learned about keeping people warm in a world that was trying to freeze them. I wrote it by hand in a maintenance log, and Sandra's team carried copies along the chain to every connected group. "You're writing a textbook," Garrett said, watching me one evening. "I'm writing a survival manual." Same thing. A textbook is a survival manual. It's how knowledge survives the person who discovered it. By day 210, the chain connected 8 groups across Arizona and into southern Utah. Over 1,000 people. Not a civilization, not yet, but a network, an open loop, a system with inputs and outputs, with flow, with the resilience that comes from connection. And the alien satellite count, which Dahlia monitored obsessively, told a different story for our region than for the rest of the world. Globally, the count was still declining, 4 per day, sometimes 5, cluster after cluster going dark. But in our sector, the number had stabilized. 8 groups holding steady. Not growing, not shrinking, surviving. We're an anomaly, Dahlia said. Everywhere else the curve is going down. Here it's flat. If they're paying attention and they're counting, so they're paying attention, we'll stand out. Let them notice, Marcus said. You want them to notice? I want them to understand that they failed. I want them to look at their count and see a flat line where there should be a decline and know that something down here is refusing to die. That's not strategy, Marcus. That's ego. Maybe, but it's also true. We're not dying. And the reason we're not dying is because we're doing something they didn't account for. They built their weapon around a model of what kills a civilization. And the model is right. It does kill a civilization, but it doesn't kill people. People are what's left after the civilization dies, and people are what builds the next one. Day 241. The probe came back. Different this time. Not a scanning pass, but descent. A deliberate, slow, controlled descent into the atmosphere, directly over our sector of Arizona. Dahlia tracked it from 40,000 kilometers to 30, to 20, to 10, to 5, to 1. It came down at the junction of the chain, the point where the routes from the Warm, Camp Verde, and Prescott converged, a sheltered valley where Sandra had built the largest and most robust dugout on the network. And it landed. I was in the Warm when Dahlia told me. Lena was at school, Mika was teaching fractions, and I was reworking the heat exchange for the 100th time, trying to squeeze another degree out of the system, and Dahlia's voice came over the intercom. We had an intercom now. Diego had wired it, flat and precise. Thomas, Communications Center, now. When I got there, she showed me the data. The object was on the ground. It was emitting a signal. The signal was different from any she'd recorded before. Not a scan, not a count, not a pulse. A sustained tone, modulated in a pattern she recognized. It's the same base 12 mathematical structure, she said. But the content is new, and it's... She hesitated. Dahlia never hesitated. What? It's including our signals in its transmission, fragments of our radio communications, our frequencies, our modulation patterns. It's echoing us back to us. Why? I think it's trying to talk. The debate that followed was the most heated we'd had since the decoy argument. Marcus wanted to destroy it. Sandra wanted to ignore it. The Camp Verde group, reached by radio, wanted to approach it. The Prescott group wanted to wall it off. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them were the same. It froze our planet, Marcus said. It killed 5.5 billion people, and now it wants to chat? No, we don't talk to the thing that tried to murder us. We don't know it's trying to talk, Sandra said. It could be a trap. It echoes our signals to get us to respond, and our response gives it targeting data. It already has targeting data. It knows exactly where we are. It's been counting us for 8 months. Then why haven't they finished us off? Dahlia asked. If they know where we are and they want us dead, why send a probe? Why not another rock? Because they're studying us. They're figuring out why we're not dead so they can fix it. Or, Dahlia said carefully, they're surprised we're not dead and they want to understand why. There's no difference. There's an enormous difference. One is a predator tracking prey. The other is a scientist encountering unexpected data. The argument went on for hours. I listened. I didn't contribute. I was thinking about something else. I was thinking about the number. 712 on day 119, declining at 4 per day. By now, day 241, the global count should be around 220. 220 clusters of survivors out of an original 1,604. Except in our sector, where the number was holding. They'd sent a probe to our sector. Not to the largest survivor groups. Cheyenne Mountain was bigger, Dugway was bigger, the nuclear submarine fleets were undoubtedly bigger. They'd sent it here. To the sector where the count wasn't declining. To the anomaly. "They're not coming to kill us," I said. Everyone looked at me. If they wanted to kill us, they'd have done it. They have the technology. They froze the planet from orbit. They don't need a probe to destroy 8 groups of survivors in Arizona. They're coming because we surprised them. And surprise is leverage. Leverage for what? Marcus asked. I don't know yet. But I know that the only thing worse than being noticed by something that can kill you is being not noticed by something that can kill you. If they're ignoring us, we die on their schedule. If they're paying attention, we have a chance to change the equation. You want to talk to them. I want to find out why they did this. I want to know if there's a way to make them stop. And yes, I want them to know we're here. I want them to look at us and see something they didn't expect. Because right now they expect us to be dead. And we're not. And that whatever they think about it, whatever they do about it, is more than we had yesterday. Dahlia said, I can construct a response signal, same base 12 structure, mathematical content primes, sequences, the kind of universal language construction that's been theorized for decades. It won't be a conversation, but it will be an answer. Marcus stared at me for a long time, then he turned and walked out. Priya followed him. I heard them talking in the corridor, not the words, just the tones, his, hard and clipped, hers, low and steady. They argued for 20 minutes and then came back in together, and Marcus said, if they make a move, any move that looks hostile, we run, all of us. We scatter along the chain and we go to ground, and we do not let them take us in a group. Agreed. And I want weapons, whatever we can make. Not because I think we can fight them, because I'd rather die swinging. Agreed. He looked at Dahlia. Send your signal. Dahlia transmitted at noon on day 242. A simple sequence. Primes. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23. Encoded in base 12, mirroring the structure of the alien signals. Broadcast on the frequency the probe was using. The probe responded in 9 seconds, not with primes, with the next number in the sequence, 29. Dahlia's hands shook. It was the only time I ever saw her hands shake. It understood, she said. It completed the sequence, it understood the mathematical content, and it responded appropriately. She sent the next prime, 31. The probe responded, 37. She sent 41. It sent 43. They played this game for an hour. Primes, then Fibonacci sequences, then geometric progressions, then simple algebraic expressions. Each time the probe completed the pattern. Each time it added something, a slight variation, an extension, a mathematical riff on the theme Dahlia had introduced. It was, she said, like playing music with someone who knew the same theory but had a completely different ear. It's learning, she said. Not the math, it already knows the math. It's learning how we express the math. Our notation, our logic patterns, our way of structuring a thought. On the second day, she started encoding words, simple nouns paired with mathematical descriptions. Water, 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen. The probe responded with its own notation for the same molecule. Earth, the 3rd planet from this star. The probe responded with a coordinate system she didn't recognize but could translate. On the 3rd day, the probe sent a signal that wasn't a response to anything Dahlia had transmitted. An original message. Dahlia spent 4 hours decoding it. It's asking a question, she said. At least I think it's asking a question. The grammatical structure suggests interrogative. What question? She looked at her notebook. She looked at me. She looked at the wall and the ceiling and the floor, and then back at her notebook, as if she needed to verify that the symbols on the page were real. It's asking why we're still alive. The question sat in the room like a physical object. Why are you still alive? Not a threat, not an accusation, a question. The Ven had sent a weapon designed to erase a civilization. And 8 months later, in the sector of the planet where their weapon should have been most effective, high altitude, arid climate, sparse population, minimal geothermal resources, survivors were not only persisting, but connecting. Their models said we should be dead. Their data said we weren't. They wanted to know why. I thought about how to answer that question for 2 days. Not the mathematical how Dahlia could encode the technical details of insulation values and heat exchange loops and diesel generator maintenance. But the real answer, the answer to why 60 people in a concrete box in Arizona were refusing to die when the math said they should. In the end, I didn't compose a mathematical message. I asked Dahlia to transmit an image. We didn't have a camera, not a functioning one, but we had Lena's drawings. The ones she made every day in Mika's school. The red rocks and the juniper trees and the blue sky. "Can you encode this?" I asked, holding up a drawing Lena had made that morning. It showed the Warm, a square building with smoke coming from the top surrounded by people. Not stick figures anymore. Real people, with faces and expressions. Garrett with his big hands, Ray with his apron, Priya with her medical bag, Marcus with his serious face, Mika with a book, Diego with a hammer, Lena herself, small in the center, holding my hand. And above the building, a sky. Not gray. Not the wet cement ceiling we'd been living under for 8 months. Blue. Clear, deep, impossible Arizona blue. The kind of blue you can fall into. The kind of blue that makes the desert look like the floor of heaven. The sky she remembered. The sky she refused to forget. "I can encode it," Dahlia said slowly. "But a drawing by an 8-year-old is not going to. It's the answer. They asked why we're still alive. This is why. Not the insulation values, not the generator, not the chain. This. A child drawing a sky she hasn't seen in 8 months because she believes she'll see it again." Dahlia stared at the drawing, then at me, then at the drawing again. "I'll need to rasterize it manually. Convert it to a pixel grid. Encode each pixel as a base 12 value. It'll take hours." "We have hours." She encoded it. She transmitted it. The probe received it. And for the first time since contact, the probe was silent for more than 9 seconds. It was silent for 6 hours. When it responded, the message wasn't mathematical. It wasn't a pattern completion or an algebraic expression or a coordinate system. It was, as best Dahlia could translate, a single concept repeated 3 times. The closest English approximation was, "Not predicted, not predicted, not predicted." I need to tell you what happened next, but first I need to tell you what was happening everywhere else, because our story wasn't the only story, even though it felt like it at the time. Through the chain radio network, which now extended via relay to Cheyenne Mountain, we learned that we were not the only group the Ven had contacted. Probes had landed near 4 other anomalous survivor clusters worldwide. One in the Swiss Alps, where a community of 1,200 people had survived in a tunnel complex originally built as a nuclear bunker. One in the Kola Peninsula in Russia, where a group of survivors had tapped into deep geothermal boreholes. One in central Japan, where a Buddhist monastery on a volcanic hot spring had become the nucleus of a network similar to our chain, and one in the ocean, near a cluster of nuclear submarines that had surfaced through the ice and linked together into a floating settlement. Each probe had initiated the same protocol: mathematical contact, pattern exchange, and then the question, "Why are you still alive?" The answers varied. The Swiss group sent engineering schematics. The Russian group sent nothing. They tried to destroy the probe, unsuccessfully. The Japanese group sent poetry. The submarine cluster sent a formal military communication demanding the Ven identify themselves and state their intentions. All 5 probes received the same response to whatever was sent. Not predicted. "They're confused," Dahlia said when we learned this. They built a model of how a technological civilization dies when you remove thermal energy from its biosphere, and the model was accurate for 96% of the population. But 4% survived. And that 4% is doing things the model didn't account for. What didn't they account for? Dahlia pulled out one of her notebooks. She'd been reconstructing the Ven's communication protocol for weeks now, building a vocabulary, a grammar, a way of encoding concepts that mapped onto their mathematical framework. It was painstaking, inexact work, and she was the first to acknowledge its limitations, but she'd made progress. The model assumed that survival requires infrastructure, power grids, supply chains, transportation networks, industrial capacity. Remove those and the population dies. And that's true, most of the population did die, but the model didn't account for. She paused, looking for the word. "People," I said. No, it accounted for people, as biological units with caloric and thermal requirements. What it didn't account for was what people do, the adaptation, the improvisation, the willingness to walk 31 miles and 60 below to bring antibiotics to strangers, the ability to teach fractions in a closet, the insistence on drawing a blue sky that doesn't exist. The model treated human civilization as a machine. Remove the parts, and the machine stops. But we're not a machine. We're open loops, Garrett said from his cot. Dahlia looked at him. We're open loops, he said. You disconnect us, we reconnect. You break the pipes, we lay new ones. That's what they didn't predict. Not that we'd survive, that we'd survive together. On day 270, the Ven probe did something none of us expected. It moved. Not away, not up. It moved toward the worm. Slowly, at walking speed, along the surface. Dahlia tracked it on her instruments. Marcus mobilized his security team. Sandra sealed the exterior doors. I put Lena in the innermost room with Mika and the other children and told her to stay there. Dad, she said, is it the snow thing? The thing that made the snow, yes. Is it going to hurt us? No, I said. And I didn't know if that was true, but I said it with everything I had. The probe arrived at the worm 17 hours after it began moving. It was smaller than I'd expected, about the size of a car. Rounded, seamless, the color of wet stone. It settled in the snow outside our service entrance and emitted a low hum, a sound I felt in my teeth more than my ears. It sat there for 3 days. On day 1, it projected a light, a complex shifting pattern on the snow surface, like a screensaver for a mind that thought in 12 dimensions. Dahlia studied it. Marcus watched it through a hole he'd drilled in the exterior wall, holding a sharpened metal rod that he'd been calling a spear and that I'd been calling a pointed stick. On day 2, it extended a thin, articulated arm, the first physical component we'd seen that wasn't smooth and seamless, and deposited an object in the snow. The object was a cube, about 4 inches on a side, the same wet stone color as the probe. It sat in the snow, inert. On day 3, Marcus went out and got it. He went alone. He didn't tell anyone he was going. He suited up in every layer he had, tucked the spear into his belt, opened the exterior door, walked 20 feet to the cube, picked it up, and walked back. The probe didn't react. The cube was warm to the touch, not hot, just warmer than the ambient temperature, which was notable because everything outside was -60. Dahlia examined it. She couldn't open it. She couldn't penetrate it with any tool we had. She could measure its emissions. It radiated heat at a steady rate, and it emitted a faint signal on the Ven frequencies. It's a message, she said, a physical message. They've been transmitting data to us electronically, and we've been responding, and this is the next step. They're giving us something. A bomb. It's not a bomb, Marcus. How do you know? Because they don't need a bomb. They can freeze the planet. A 4-inch cube as a delivery mechanism would be like using a scalpel to do the work of an ocean. He conceded the point, grudgingly. The cube sat on Dahlia's desk for 2 days before it activated. It happened at night. Dahlia was asleep, and the night watch operator, a woman named Gia from the Prescott group who'd come down the chain to help with communications, saw it and woke everyone. The cube was projecting. Not light or not just light. An image, 3-dimensional, hovering above the cube like a hologram, rotating slowly. It was a map. A star map. Our solar system, rendered with a precision that made Dahlia gasp. The sun, the planets, the asteroid belt, the Kuiper belt, all rendered in meticulous detail, with orbital paths traced in glowing lines. And beyond the solar system, extending outward, a web of lines connecting stars. Hundreds of them, thousands. A network of stars connected by lines of varying thickness and brightness, spreading across a volume of space that Dahlia estimated at several hundred light years. It's a territory map, she said. These lines are routes, connections, trade routes maybe, or communication pathways or migration corridors. This is their space, their domain. She pointed at our sun. It was at the edge of the web. One thin, faint line connected it to the nearest node, a star she identified as Wolf 359, about 8 light years away. We're on the periphery, she said, the very edge of their territory, and that line connecting us, it's the thinnest one on the map. We're barely part of it, We're a margin note. A margin note they tried to erase, Marcus said. Yes, and that might be exactly why they tried to erase us. We're on the edge, unimportant. A small, newly technological civilization that could be removed with minimal effort and minimal consequence. Pest control. The word landed like a slap. Pest control. 5.5 billion people. All of our music, all of our art, all of our history, all of our science, all of our love and grief and hope and failure. Pest control. I looked at the map. At our sun, tiny, peripheral, barely connected. At the web of alien civilizations stretching away from us in every direction. Vast. Incomprehensibly vast. And somewhere in that vastness, a mind or a committee or an algorithm had looked at our little star and decided it wasn't worth keeping. And then the map changed. Our sun pulsed, brightened. The faint line connecting us to Wolf 359 thickened, and a new element appeared, a symbol hovering next to our star. Dahlia leaned in, studying it. She pulled out her notebooks, cross-referencing the symbol with the vocabulary she'd built. It's a designation, she said. A category. They've assigned us a new category. What category? She took a long time translating, longer than usual. When she looked up, her expression was one I'd never seen on her. Not surprise exactly, and not fear. Something between awe and dread. The closest translation is persistent, or unexpectedly durable, or, she trailed off, then said it. Interesting. They've reclassified us from removable to interesting. The star map stayed active for weeks. During that time, Dahlia and Gia and a growing team of people from across the chain studied it, decoded it, argued about it, and slowly, painstakingly began to understand what it was telling us. The Ven were not a single species. They were a collective. Hundreds of species, spread across hundreds of star systems, connected by the network the map displayed. They'd been expanding for, as best Dahlia could calculate, roughly 14,000 years. Their method was consistent. Identify young, pre-spacefaring civilizations on the periphery of their territory. Evaluate them. If the evaluation concluded that the civilization posed a future threat, not a current threat, a future threat, a projected threat based on technological trajectory and expansion, potential, eliminate it, cleanly, efficiently. Freeze the biosphere, sterilize the surface, move on. They'd done it thousands of times. Earth was not special. Earth was not targeted for any particular reason beyond location and timing. We were in the way. We were growing. We would eventually become a problem, so they removed us. Except they didn't. This is the part they can't process, Dahlia said, and there was a fierce light in her eyes that I hadn't seen before, the light of someone who has found the crack in the wall. They've done this thousands of times. They have a model. The model says, remove thermal energy, collapse infrastructure, the civilization dies. And the model has worked every time for 14,000 years. Every species they've done this to has died. Every one. Except us. Except us. We're the first species in 14,000 years to survive the freeze, and they don't know why. Their model can't explain it. And a model that has worked flawlessly for 14,000 years suddenly failing, that's not a minor anomaly. That's a paradigm shift. That's a crisis. A crisis for them. Yes, because if their model is wrong about us, it might be wrong about future targets too. And if their sterilization method isn't reliable, their entire expansion strategy, their entire approach to managing the periphery of their territory is in question. We didn't just survive, we broke their playbook. I sat with this. We broke their playbook. 60 people in a concrete box in Arizona, and a wildland firefighter, and a plumber, and a cook, and a college kid with a missing ear, and a nurse who punched hearts back to life, and a power plant engineer who taught herself xenolinguistics in a closet, and an 8-year-old girl with a Fox backpack who drew blue skies she couldn't see. We broke their playbook. What happens now? I asked. Dahlia pointed at the map, at the symbol next to our sun. Interesting. Now, she said, they decide what to do about it. On day 300, the probe changed again. It projected a new message, not a map this time, but a proposal. Dahlia decoded it over the course of a week, working with Gia and a mathematician from the Swiss group who communicated via relay. The proposal was simple, in the way that a guillotine is simple. The Ven would reverse the freeze. They had the technology. The thermodynamic weapon worked in both directions. They could restore Earth's thermal balance within weeks. The oceans would thaw, the atmosphere would warm, the snow would melt, the sky would clear. The condition: humanity would accept a permanent observer presence. Ven satellites would remain in orbit. Ven probes would be stationed on the surface. Human technological development would be monitored and, where necessary, constrained. We would be allowed to rebuild, but we would not be allowed to develop spacefaring capability. We would not be allowed to leave our solar system. We would remain on the periphery, interesting but contained. A cage. A warm cage with blue skies and flowing water and growing things. But a cage. "They're offering us a reservation," Marcus said when we shared the proposal with the Worm. His voice was flat, not angry beyond angry. The kind of calm that comes after anger has burned through every available fuel and left only the carbon behind. "They're offering us survival," Dahlia countered. "Survival on their terms. Survival as a zoo exhibit. The interesting species that wouldn't die. Come look at the humans in their enclosure." As opposed to what? Survival at 60 below, losing 4 clusters a day with 6 months of fuel and a shrinking population? That's not freedom, Marcus. That's a slow extinction that we chose instead of a fast one. The argument fractured the Worm. Not cleanly, not into 2 camps, but into a dozen positions, each with its own logic, each with its own desperation. Garrett said, "A cage with a roof and running water is still a cage, but dying free is still dying. And I'm too old and too tired to pretend that principle keeps you warm." Ray said nothing. He cooked dinner. When pressed, he said, "I just want to cook for people who aren't starving, whatever gets us there." Sandra said, "I built the chain so we could connect, not so we could be connected. There's a difference." Diego said, "I'm 18. I have 1 ear. I want to see the sky. If they can give us the sky, I say we take the sky." Mika said, "What do we teach the children? That we fought and died, or that we survived and adapted? I don't know which one is right, but I know which one gives them more time." Priya said, "I've amputated 9 limbs in 8 months. I've watched people die because I didn't have a bottle of antibiotics. If they can stop the cold, I don't care what they put in orbit. I'll take the deal." Marcus said, "If you take the deal, you surrender every future generation's freedom. Your grandchildren will live in a cage, and their grandchildren, and theirs, forever. Because the Ven don't do temporary. Their map shows 14,000 years of expansion. When they put a fence around something, it stays fenced." Lena said nothing. She was drawing. She drew the Worm, and the people, and the blue sky. The same drawing she always made, the same hope she always carried. I looked at her and I knew what I was going to say, and I hated myself for it, and I said it anyway. "We don't take the deal." The room erupted, not in anger and fear, because refusing the deal meant refusing warmth, refusing survival, refusing everything they'd been dreaming of for 10 months. "Listen to me," I said. "Listen. The deal isn't what it looks like. It looks like mercy. It's not. It's management. The Ven have a model. Their model failed. They need a new model. And the new model they're proposing is containment. Keep the interesting species alive, study it, control it, prevent it from ever becoming a threat. That's not survival. That's a terrarium." "You're gambling with our lives," Priya said. And she was right. Yes, but I'm gambling on us, not on them. They came down here because we surprised them, because we did something their 14,000-year model couldn't predict. We connected. We adapted. We built the chain. We refused to die alone. That's what made them come to us, and that's the only leverage we have. If we take the deal, we surrender the leverage. We tell them, "Yes, you were right. We can't survive on our own. Please put us in a cage." But if we refuse, if we keep going, keep building, keep connecting, we tell them something else. We tell them the model isn't just wrong. We tell them the model is going to keep being wrong. And a species that can keep being wrong, that can keep surprising you, is not a species you can contain. Or, Marcus said quietly, it's a species you need to destroy more thoroughly. Maybe. That's the gamble. The room was silent. Not the cold silence, not the scared silence, a different silence. The silence of people deciding. Dahlia broke it. We put it to the network. All 8 groups. This isn't a decision for 60 people in a room. This is a decision for everyone on the chain. We put it to the network. It took 3 days for every group to respond. The vote was close, not unanimous. Nothing real is unanimous. But the majority said no. No deal. No cage. No warm surrender. We'd stay cold. We'd stay free. We'd keep building. Dahlia transmitted our refusal on day 312. She encoded it carefully, including not just the rejection but the reasoning, not as an argument, but as data. Here is what we are. Here is why we continue. Here is what we will not accept. The probe received the transmission. It was silent for 4 days. During those 4 days, I didn't sleep. Nobody slept. We waited for the sky to fall again for another impact, another weapon, a final solution applied more thoroughly this time. Marcus had his people positioned at every exit. Sandra had contingency plans for evacuation along the chain. Priya had triage kits packed and ready. Mika had the children in the innermost room, practicing fractions and drawing pictures and singing songs, because that was what she knew how to do, and it was as good as anything else. Lena drew. She drew the same picture, the warm, the people, the blue sky. But this time she added something. A small, rounded shape above the building, the color of wet stone. The probe. She'd never seen it, but she'd heard us talk about it, and she'd drawn it hovering over the warm like a cloud, like a moon, like a watchful eye. "Dad," she said, showing me the picture, "is the stone thing bad?" "I don't know. Is it alive?" "I think so, in its way." "Does it have kids?" I looked at her. "I don't know, Bean. I hope it has kids. Then maybe it understands." On day 316, the probe responded. The cube on Dahlia's desk flickered to life and projected a new map. The same star map, our solar system, the web of Venn territory, the connecting lines. But the designation next to our sun had changed. Dahlia translated it. It took her 2 hours. When she finished, she came to find me. I was in the grow room checking the bean trays. "The designation changed," she said. "To what?" "It's not a simple translation. It's a compound concept, like a German word that packs multiple meanings. But the closest I can get is," she took a breath, "autonomous persistent anomaly." What does that mean? It means they're not going to reverse the freeze, and they're not going to destroy us. They're going to leave us in the cold, leave the satellites in place, keep monitoring, but no more contact, no more offers, no more probes. They're going to watch us and see what happens. They're running an experiment. Yes, we're the experiment. Can a species survive what we did to it without external assistance? Can it rebuild without the resources we destroyed? Can it stay interesting? And if we stop being interesting? Then I imagine we stop being autonomous. I looked at the bean trays, small, fragile, green in the fluorescent light. Growing in soil we'd dug from under 10 feet of snow, watered by water we'd kept from freezing, lit by lights we'd powered with fuel we'd scrounged from the ruins of the world. "How long?" I asked. "How long what? How long do we have to stay interesting before they change their mind?" Dahlia shook her head. "I don't know. The data doesn't say. Maybe a year, maybe a century, maybe never. Maybe interesting isn't a threshold. Maybe it's a continuous evaluation. As long as we keep surprising them, we keep existing. The moment we become predictable, we're back in the removable category. Then we don't become predictable." "Tomas, you can't plan to be unpredictable. That's a paradox." "It's not. It's what we've been doing since day one. We survive in ways they don't expect. We connect in ways they can't model. We grow beans in a closet and teach fractions in a bunker and draw blue skies in the dark. That's not unpredictable. It's human. It's just that they've never met anything human before." The probe lifted off on day 318. It rose slowly, deliberately, the way it had descended, and returned to orbit. The cube on Dahlia's desk went dark. The satellite signals continued the 18-hour pulse, the count. But the count now included a new data point, a flag next to our sector that Dahlia decoded as the equivalent of an asterisk, a footnote, a mark that said, "Watch this one." We watched it go from the roof of the warm. Marcus had cleared a small area of snow and installed a ladder, and a few of us climbed up and stood in the killing cold and watched the probe ascend a dark dot against the gray sky, rising until it was gone. "Good riddance," Marcus said. "They'll be back," Dahlia said. "Then we'll be ready." "Ready how?" He didn't answer. He stood on the roof, in the wind, at 60 below, and watched the sky where the probe had been. His face was raw and red, and his eyes were watering from the cold, and he looked like something carved from the same material as the landscape, hard, frozen, enduring. Priya touched his arm. "Come inside." "In a minute." "Now, your extremities are exposed. 2 more minutes and you lose something." He looked at her. Something passed between them that I wasn't part of, something that had been building for months. In the clinic and on the chain, and in the arguments and the silences, and the 1,000 small moments of a shared survival. It wasn't love, or not only love, it was the thing that happens between people who have kept each other alive. He came inside. Year 1, day 365, 1 year. I stood in the grow room and counted beans, not metaphorical beans, actual beans. 412 plants producing an average of 6 pods each, 3 beans per pod. Roughly 7,400 beans per harvest cycle, which was every 45 days. Enough to supplement, not sustain. But supplementing was enough because the chain had connected us to groups with other resources. The Camp Verde group had a greenhouse now. A real greenhouse built from salvaged glass and heated by a hot spring they'd found, and it was producing lettuce and tomatoes and, improbably, strawberries. The Page group had fish. They'd found a stock pond that was thermally heated by the dam's residual infrastructure, and they were farming tilapia. The Prescott group had a man who knew how to make biodiesel from pine resin, and the diesel was flowing down the chain in 5-gallon cans carried by people who walked 30 miles in the cold and never complained. Not a civilization, not yet, but the skeleton of one. The pipes Garrett had talked about, laid in the snow, connecting closed loops into something open, something alive. Garrett died on day 347. I need to tell it plainly because he deserved plain telling. His heart gave out during the night. Priya was there. She was always there for the night watches. Because that's when people die. In the quiet hours, when the body relaxes its grip, and she tried to bring him back. CPR. The precordial thump that had worked before. It didn't work this time. His heart had been failing for months, and it finally failed, and there was nothing she could do. He died in the warm, surrounded by people he'd helped keep alive, in a building whose pipes he'd laid and whose walls he'd reinforced, and whose philosophy he'd articulated better than anyone. A civilization is just a bunch of closed loops that learn to share pipe. We buried him outside in the snow with a metal cross that Diego built. The cross was larger than the others. Diego had welded it from pipe sections, plumbing pipe specifically, because it was the only material that felt right. At the service, Dahlia spoke. She said, "Garrett understood something that engineers spend their whole lives trying to learn. That a system's value isn't in its components, it's in its connections. He connected us, not the chain us, the people in this room. He connected us by talking and by listening and by working and by refusing to stop doing any of those things until his body stopped him. The pipes he laid are still carrying water. The loops he opened are still flowing. The civilization he believed in is still being built." Lena drew a picture of Garrett. She put it on the wall next to his cot, which no one had the heart to move. The picture showed Garrett with his enormous hands, holding a pipe wrench in one and a cup of tea in the other. He was smiling. Above him, the sky was blue. We kept building. On day 400, the chain extended to its 9th group, a community of 60 people in Albuquerque who'd survived in a hospital basement. They had medical supplies we desperately needed. We had food they desperately needed. The exchange happened on a route that Sandra's team had spent 7 weeks constructing, through mountain passes and frozen river valleys and terrain that would have been difficult in summer and was suicidal in winter. Nobody died on the Albuquerque route. Not because it was safer, it wasn't. Because the route builders had learned. 8 months of chain construction had taught them things no manual could teach: how to read the snow, how to feel the wind shifting, how to spot the signs of an incoming temperature drop, how to build shelter dugouts that held heat against the worst the cold could throw. They'd learned by doing. They'd learned by losing people. And they'd converted that loss into knowledge and the knowledge into survival. On day 430, Dahlia detected a change in the satellite signals. The number of survivor clusters had stopped declining, not in our sector, globally. The global count has stabilized at 179, she announced at the evening meeting. It's been holding for 3 weeks, no new clusters going dark. Why? Because the chain model is spreading. Other networks are forming. The Swiss group has connected 12 clusters across Central Europe. The Japanese network has reached Korea and coastal China. The submarine cluster has established shore settlements in 5 locations, and everywhere they connect, the count stabilizes. She put it on the map, our map, the one we kept on the wall of the communication center, hand-drawn, showing the chain and all its branches. She added the global data, dots, hundreds of them, and lines connecting them, spreading like roots from a dozen anchor points. We're not the only ones building, she said. We're just the ones who started first. On day 450, I received a radio message from Cheyenne Mountain. It was addressed to me personally, the first personal communication I'd received from anyone outside the chain. Thomas Palacio, The Warm, Flagstaff, Arizona. Your thermal engineering protocols have been disseminated to every confirmed survivor group in the Northern Hemisphere. Estimated lives saved by implementation of your methods, 12,000 and counting. On behalf of the surviving command structure of the United States of America, thank you. General Patricia Atchison, NORAD, 12,000. 12,000 people alive because I'd written down what I knew about heat and insulation and sent it along the chain. 12,000 people warm because an HVAC technician who'd argued about duct gauge with a county inspector had put those arguments in a notebook and someone had carried the notebook through the snow to someone else. I didn't know what to do with that number. It was too big. It was too much. I sat in the grow room with the beans and the fluorescent light, and I held the message and I thought about the number, and I couldn't make it fit inside my head. Lena found me there. She climbed into my lap. She was getting bigger, 9 now, long-legged and sharp-elbowed in the way of children who are growing on not quite enough food, and she looked at the message. Dad, what does that say? It says people are using our ideas to stay warm. Which ideas? The ones about insulation, about ceiling buildings, about heat exchange. Your ideas? Our ideas, everyone's, Garrett's, Sandra's, everyone who built the Warm. She thought about this. So the Warm is bigger than this building? Yes, Bean. The Warm is much bigger than this building. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to school. I stayed in the grow room and held the message and tried to deserve the number on it and couldn't, and decided that deserving it wasn't the point. The point was the 12,000 people, alive, warm, breathing. The point was always the breathing. Year 2. By the 2nd year, the world had changed again. Not back to what it was. It would never go back to what it was. But it had changed in ways that the Venns model could not have predicted, and I believe could not have understood. The networks grew, not just in size and complexity. The chain became the Western network, connecting over 40 groups from Montana to the Mexican border. The Swiss network became the European Alliance. The Japanese network became the Pacific Cooperative. The submarine cluster became the Maritime Federation. Each one was different structure, different governance, different culture. But they shared principles, they shared information. They shared the knowledge that survival requires connection, and connection requires generosity, and generosity requires trust, and trust requires time, and time requires survival. A closed loop, an open loop. A civilization. The population stabilized. Not at pre-impact levels, we'd never reach those in our lifetimes, but the decline stopped. Births began to outnumber deaths. For the first time in 18 months, there were more humans alive at the end of a month than at the beginning. And the temperature, the brutal, killing, planet-wide cold, didn't change. 60 below, day after day, month after month. The snow didn't melt, the sky didn't clear, the oceans didn't thaw. The Ven's weapon was permanent, or at least persistent, and we were living inside it. We adapted. Sandra's team developed construction techniques for permanent snow structures. Not igloos, but engineered habitats, double-walled, insulated, designed to use the snow itself as a thermal barrier. They built them along the chain routes, replacing the emergency dugouts with actual dwellings. People moved into them. People lived in them. People raised children in them. Diego, 19 now, missing an ear, with hands calloused beyond his years, became the best snow architect in the Western network. He had an intuition for the material that nobody else possessed, a feel for how snow packed and bonded and breathed, how it could be shaped into arches and domes and walls that were stronger than wood and warmer than concrete. He built the first freestanding snow cathedral at the Chain Junction Point, a structure that seated 200 people and stayed above freezing using nothing but body heat and the thermal mass of its own walls. They held the first inter-network meeting there. Representatives from 12 groups gathered in a building made of the same snow that was supposed to have killed them, discussing shared resources and communication standards and agricultural techniques and, tentatively, cautiously, the question that nobody wanted to ask but everybody was thinking, what do we do about the Ven? We wait, Dahlia said. We fight, Marcus said. We grow, I said. We were in the communication center, larger now, expanded into an adjacent room, staffed by 3 full-time operators who monitored the satellite signals around the clock. The satellite count was still running, 179 clusters globally, stable for 6 months. The asterisk next to our sector was still there, along with asterisks next to the Swiss, Japanese, and maritime sectors. 4 anomalies, 4 places where the model failed. We have no weapons that can reach orbit, Marcus said. That's a fact, but facts change. 2 years ago we had no network, no agriculture, no communication infrastructure. Now we have all 3. What we build next depends on what we decide we need. If we build weapons, they'll see it, Dahlia said. They're watching, they're counting. The moment they detect military technology development, we go from interesting anomaly back to threat to be eliminated, and this time they'll be more thorough. So we just accept being watched forever, being contained, being monitored like bacteria in a petri dish? I didn't say that. I said we can't fight them with weapons, but there are other kinds of fights. Like what? Like being so indispensable that eliminating us becomes a net loss. Marcus stared at her. Indispensable to what? To whom? To them. The Ven Collective includes hundreds of species. Their expansion model, the freeze and sterilize approach, has worked for 14,000 years. But we've shown it can fail. That knowledge has value. Not to the faction that tried to kill us, but to other factions within the collective. Factions that might question the model. Factions that might be looking for alternatives. You're talking about alien politics. I'm talking about the only kind of war we can win, not a war of weapons, a war of ideas. We survived. That idea that the model is fallible is now loose inside their collective. And ideas, unlike weapons, can't be frozen. On day 730, 2 years exactly, I stood on the roof of the Worm for the second time and looked at the sky. It was still gray, still the same wet cement ceiling, pressing down, featureless, endless. Still no sun, no stars, no blue. But below the sky, the world had changed. The chain stretched in every direction, marked routes, shelter stations, supply caches, dwellings, the thin but unbreakable filaments of a new civilization woven through the ice. I could see the nearest route marker from the roof, an orange stake planted in the snow, pointing toward Camp Verde. And beyond it, if I squinted, the next one. And the next. 400 miles of chain in our network alone. Thousands of miles globally, connecting people who would have died alone. Opening loops that would have closed forever. The Ven satellite pulsed overhead, invisible, counting. 179 clusters, stable. The count that was supposed to reach 0 in 6 months had leveled off, held, and in the last 2 months ticked up by 1. A new cluster in Brazil, where survivors had figured out how to tap geothermal vents along the mid-Atlantic ridge and had established a settlement large enough to register on the Ven sensors. 180. Going up. I thought about the Ven's model, the 14,000-year model. The model that said, remove the heat, the civilization dies. And I thought about what we'd done that the model couldn't account for. We hadn't beaten the cold. The cold was still there, still killing, still 60 below every day of our lives. We hadn't reversed the weapon. We hadn't developed some miraculous technology. We hadn't discovered a magic solution. We'd just refused to die alone. That was it. That was the whole thing. The model assumed that a civilization was its infrastructure, its power grids, its supply chains, its technology. Remove those, and the civilization ends. And the model was right as far as it went. Our infrastructure was destroyed. Our technology was gone. Our power grids were dead. Everything the Ven defined as civilization was erased. But they'd left the people. And people, it turns out, are not a function of their infrastructure. People are what build infrastructure. People are what create technology. People are what generate power. The Ven had confused the product for the producer. They'd killed the machine and assumed the mechanics would die without it. Instead, the mechanics built a new machine. Out of snow and diesel and duct tape and bean plants and charcoal drawings and the unshakable, irrational, magnificent stubbornness of a species that looks at the math saying it's dead and says no. Not yet. Not while we can still hold each other. Not while the children are still drawing the sky. I climbed down from the roof. The cold hit me, 60 below, the same cold that had been trying to kill me for 730 days. I sealed the hatch behind me, entered the vestibule, passed through both layers of plastic sheeting, and stepped into the warm, 54 degrees. The smell of Ray's cooking. He was making something with tilapia and beans and pine needles, don't ask. The sound of Mika's class reciting multiplication tables, the hum of the generator, the murmur of Dahlia's operators monitoring the Ven signals, the clank of Diego's tools as he worked on something in the workshop, building something new, always building. Lena was at her desk in the school corner. She was drawing. She'd gotten good, really good. The pictures were detailed now, precise, vivid. She drew the warm, the chain, the people, the roots, the snow. She drew the world as it was, frozen and gray and hard. But she still drew the sky blue. Every time, every picture. The sky was blue, the deep, impossible Arizona blue that she remembered from before and refused to release. It was not accurate. It was not realistic. Mika had gently suggested once that she might try drawing the sky as it actually looked, for practice. And Lena had looked at her with an expression that was so exactly my mother's expression that my breath caught, and she'd said, "No, the sky is blue. It's just waiting." She was right, about all of it. I sat down beside her and watched her draw, and outside the walls the cold pressed in, and above the clouds the Ven watched, and everywhere across the frozen world people were building and connecting and surviving and refusing, and the math said we were dead, and we were not dead, and the sky was waiting, and so were we. Not predicted. They had no idea. Year 10. I'm writing this from the Western Network's Central Archive, which is a concrete building in Flagstaff, Arizona, that used to be a water treatment plant and that Lena, who is 18 now and studying structural engineering under Sandra's supervision, still calls the warm. The temperature outside is -32 Fahrenheit. It's been warming slowly, almost imperceptibly, a degree or two per year, and Dahlia believes the crystallization effect is degrading naturally. In another 50 years, she says, the oceans might begin to thaw. In 100, the sky might clear. We'll be here. We're not going anywhere. The global survivor count, as of this morning's satellite pulse, is 411, up from a low of 179. Each number represents a cluster, a settlement, a community, some small, some large, all connected. The networks span every continent. The chain that started as 31 miles of orange stakes in the snow is now part of a planetary web of routes and settlements and supply lines and communication relays that reaches from the Arctic to the Antarctic, from mountaintop to seafloor, a new civilization built inside the ruin of the old one. We teach our children differently now. Not better differently. We teach them that heat is precious. We teach them that connection is survival. We teach them to build tight and to share freely and to never, ever close the loop. We teach them about the Ven, not as monsters, not as enemies, as a lesson. The Ven looked at us and saw infrastructure, and they destroyed it. They looked again and saw persistence, and they were confused. They looked a third time and saw growth, and they were afraid. They are still watching. They will watch for a long time. And one day, when the sky clears and the oceans thaw, and we have rebuilt not just what we lost, but something beyond what we lost, they will have to decide again what to do about us. And we will surprise them. Again. Marcus is 40 now. He runs the Western Network security operations, which means he spends most of his time coordinating route safety and search and rescue teams, and arguing with Sandra about construction standards. He and Priya have 2 children, both born in the warm. both growing up in a world of ice and warmth and people who refuse to stop working. Priya runs the medical network. She trained 46 doctors and nurses across the Western network, using a curriculum she wrote by hand in the first year and has been revising ever since. She still does surgery. She still punches hearts. She told me once, in a rare quiet moment, that she sometimes dreams of a warm hospital with bright lights and full supply cabinets, and patients who come in for checkups instead of amputations. Then I wake up, she said, and I go to work. Dahlia is still in the communication center. She's been in continuous dialogue with the Ven for 8 years, through the satellites, through probes that visit every few months, through a vocabulary that now encompasses thousands of concepts. She understands them better than anyone on Earth. She says they're not evil, they're not cruel, they're old and they're careful, and they've been doing the same thing for so long that they've forgotten there might be another way. They're a closed loop, she told me once. The biggest, oldest, most powerful closed loop in this part of the galaxy, and we're the pipe that connects them to something they haven't seen before. Diego is 28. He builds cities, not out of concrete and steel, out of snow and ice and the strange, beautiful, impossible materials that humanity has learned to create in the cold. His structures dot the landscape of the Western network like crystals growing from the earth, each one a piece of the proof that we are here, and we are building, and we have not stopped. Ray still cooks. His food is better now. The tilapia is fatter, and the beans are more plentiful, and he's figured out how to make bread from a grain hybrid that the Japanese network developed for cold weather agriculture. He says he's writing a cookbook. The working title is 60 Below, Recipes for the End of the World. Mika teaches. She has a school now, a real school, with classrooms and desks and pencils that aren't charcoal and 63 students, and a curriculum that includes mathematics and science and history and art. She teaches art the way she always has, not as a luxury, not as an elective, but as a survival skill, the most important survival skill, because art is how you remember what you're surviving for. Garrett's cross is still there, outside the warm in the snow. Diego maintains it. The pipe wrench and the cup of tea. I visit it sometimes, in the gray light, and I talk to him. I tell him about the pipes, about the loops, about the civilization he believed in before anyone else did. I tell him he was right. And Lena, my daughter, 18 years old, sharp and strong and stubborn in ways that have nothing to do with me and everything to do with the species we belong to. She is studying engineering because she wants to build, not shelters, not survival systems, not things that keep the cold out. She wants to build things that go up, structures that reach toward the sky, toward the gray ceiling that has been our sky for 10 years. She still draws, every day. She draws the warm, and the chain, and the people, and the world. And the sky is always blue, always. Every picture. The deep, impossible blue that she remembers, that she carries, that she will not let go. I asked her once last year on her birthday why she kept drawing the blue sky. She was 17. She'd spent her entire conscious childhood in the cold. She'd lost people. She'd worked harder than any child should have to work. She'd seen things no child should see. And still, every day, the blue sky. She looked at me. She had her mother's eyes. I'd almost forgotten that. But it was true. She had her mother's eyes, dark and steady and full of a certainty that came from somewhere I couldn't reach. Because it's still there, she said. Above the clouds. The blue is still there. The cold didn't destroy it. They just made it so we can't see it. But it's there. And one day the clouds will go away, and we'll see it again. And I want to remember what it looks like. She went back to her drawing. I walked outside. -32. The gray sky pressing down. The snow stretching in every direction, broken only by the orange stakes of the chain and the crystal structures of Diego's buildings and the metal crosses that marked the people we'd lost. I stood there in the cold, and I looked up. The sky was gray. The sky was always gray. But above the gray, above the clouds, above the ice crystals, above the frozen atmosphere, the blue was there. Invisible, unreachable, patient. Waiting. Like us.